Welcome to the B2B Brand 180 podcast, where we're going to talk all about marketing strategy and growth plans for our audience today. I'm excited to bring in Mark Albert. He is the founder and CEO of Media Advisory Experts. It's a Washington, D.C. based consultancy firm, and they provide media training, storytelling, and video production services to clients all over the United States. Welcome, Mark. Thanks for coming in today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, I would love for you to share. You have quite an extensive background, so I would love for you to share a little bit about your background so they can have a little bit of knowledge on your expertise.
Sure. Well, I spent 25 years in broadcast journalism, on air as a correspondent at CBS News, and I reported across the country from the White House, Congress, and around the world, from Peru and Taiwan and Australia for the network. And so I was on the CBS Evening News, CBS This Morning, CBS Sunday Morning. That was great. And then I launched and created the first ever national investigative unit for Hearst Communications. So they have TV stations around the country, Boston, Milwaukee, Orlando, and newspapers, San Francisco Chronicle, Houston Chronicle, et cetera, and newspapers and digital properties. So for 25 years, I've been holding people accountable, asking tough questions, and really diving into a lot of topics that your listeners probably are really, really interested in. So after 25 years and the gray hairs to prove it on my temples, I decided last year to step away on a little bit of a sabbatical, and I have launched full-time my firm, Media Advisory Experts, as you mentioned. So we're doing crisis communications, we're doing media training, like you mentioned, video production, earned media placement, that media that you have to earn with your expertise. You can't buy a placement on A1 of the New York Times. You need to earn it because you're bringing value to that journalist and their audience. And so I'm doing that full time now. It's been just fantastic. And I get to meet people like you and be on your podcast.
Great. Thank you very much for your background. So what I'm excited to talk about today is many people have stage fright, especially when they see a camera. So, and you really do specialize in helping professionals and individuals move through that so they are very comfortable in that process. So you've been doing this for 25 years. So this is like old hat for you, right? If you were to give somebody a few key tips, some executives, maybe business professionals, on what's it like to be behind the camera, what are some top tips that you could share that you think would be valuable for our audience today?
Sure. Well, so I want to take you back 25 years when I was in journalism school and what they taught us then when you're facing that camera. And of course, the camera doesn't have feelings. It's a piece of glass and metal and plastic. But you realize that you're talking to so many people. For me on the CBS Evening News, it was 5-6 million people a night. And so what are you going to think about to get over that stage fright, as you mentioned? And in journalism school, they always taught us, think of your mother or your husband or your sister or your best friend, somebody you're extremely close with. How would you tell that person the story you're communicating? How would you address them? How would you use your hands and body language? And certainly you are not nervous talking to your mother, right? And so when you're looking into that camera lens or you're speaking to that interviewer, you've got to pick that one person that's so special in your life and channel them, channel what you're speaking to them. And that helps a lot of people get over those nerves. You're in a big audience, you're speaking on stage, you've got 500 people in the audience. Maybe the lights are really bright on you, so you can't actually see people's faces. You're looking out into this black abyss. What do you do then? You think of your mother or you think of a loved one. You're talking to them. And that seems to help a lot of people. The other thing I would say is that everyone likes a story. And so when you're about to make a public speech or you're about to go on camera, you're being interviewed for your expertise, what is a story that's easily relatable? And that at the end, the moral of the story is whatever you're trying to communicate. Maybe it's a challenge you've overcome. Maybe it's the top tip you have on gardening or being a financial advisor. Stories always help to sort of distill the big concepts into something that's easily relatable. So one, think of your mother or someone you love when you're talking to try to get over that stage fright. Two, come up with a story that can make what you're saying relatable. And number three, depending on the circumstances, so you're not going to want to do this all the time, there's a way to work in humor, especially self-deprecating humor, that often endears yourself to the audience.
And I think if you can look at the camera like a person, to your point, like your mother or your brother or your sister or your spouse, that takes away everything else that's around you thinking, oh my gosh, there's thousands of people watching me right now. It's so I love that. I love that recommendation. When it actually getting earned media, it can get tricky these days. A lot has changed over the last 15 years when it comes to earned media, what's on the internet, what's real, what's not. Do you have some recommendations on how businesses can go about building that thought leadership perspective of themselves and then being able to be a thought leader and being able to get that earned media in a way that actually benefits their business?
I'm glad you asked because this actually vexes many, many people that come to us for help. So let me break this actually into two main parts. One, you mentioned thought leadership. And I would actually submit that thought leadership is a little bit different than going after earned media and getting quoted in the media. I always tell clients you need to build your thought leadership first. So in other words, are you weighing in on LinkedIn with thoughts, with value, with concepts that are going to be engaging for those in your network, not just always replying, although replying, as we know from the algorithm, does work. But are you adding something on that topic that you want to be quoted about in the media that adds value to your followers? Are you building up that thought leadership? Are you writing those op-eds? Are you contributing in some way to the broader conversation? What does that do? That leaves a
Mhm.
trail, right? That almost leaves breadcrumbs for the journalist. So when they come across your name or they're getting a pitch to get you on camera, they can look at your profiles and they see that this isn't the first time that you're weighing in on a topic. You've actually weighed in very intelligently over the past 2 years, for example. And
Mhm.
so building up that thought leadership as the foundation before you go after earned media is incredibly crucial because otherwise it's like you're sounding off on for the first time about a topic. You don't have a record, a track record of providing value on that topic. So I would say that's the first piece. We need to lay that foundation. The second piece for earned media, there are a couple things that happen that really stymie executives, businesses, and even honestly, Linda, PR firms. They don't
Mhm.
understand. Number one, please, please, please stop pitching your company. Stop pitching your brand. Stop pitching your product. I don't want to cover, if I'm a journalist, I don't care about your sunscreen 5000, right? I don't care. What I care is about how to prevent my readers from getting sunburn and skin cancer this summer. And so it's a mindset change. Stop pitching your company, your brand, your product. Instead, pitch the value that you can bring to a journalist's listeners, readers, and viewers. So, for example, if I'm a financial advisor and we're coming up on the end of the year, here are 5 top tax tips
Mhm.
to do December 31st. I'm
Right.
not pitching Mark Albert Accounting.
Right.
I'm not pitching Mark Albert Financial Advisor. I'm
Right.
adding value to that journalist audience by pitching top 5 things to do by the end of the year. This can be replicated in almost any industry, right? So if I'm using that sunscreen example, I'm going to pitch right before spring break. I'm going to pitch right before summer. Those are my sweet spots in the year. I'm not going to say cover Mark Albert sunscreen,
Right.
right? I'm
Right.
going to talk about how to add value. That is so key. And it is what so many businesses miss. As I often say to audiences, journalists aren't supposed to carry your water. The journalist doesn't care about your product. It's not their job to give you free advertising. What's valuable for leaders and executives is when you're quoted in earned media, you are sort of covered in that trust veneer, right? You are
Right.
now quoted as an expert and they're deferring to you. That's backlink. That's something that you can point to that adds to your expertise. So the number one lesson I would say, Linda, is if you're trying to get earned media, just stop with
Mhm.
pitching the brands. The second thing I would say is the message that you as an executive or a company use for your employees is different than what you use for your investors, right? And that
Right.
message is different than what you use to your customers. And I would submit that none of those should be used with a journalist. And this is
Mhm.
also different for people to understand. You can't use the same message with your employees, your investors, and your customers, which are all different, than you use to a journalist. Instead, we need to craft that fourth message, that message that will get a journalist's attention. Because I don't want your investor pitch and I don't want your employee pitch and I don't want to know the pitch from your customers because that's not me as a journalist.
Correct.
And so coming up with a different message is also very, very key when you're pitching.
I like what you talked about regarding the angle and really trying to get earned media around something topic that's interesting, not about a company or a product or a service. They could care less. It's really taking what it brings to the table that might be unique or different that a journalist may be interested in. So I can definitely see that perspective, and I think that's a good point for our audience to hear today. So sometimes people are on the spot, they're being interviewed by the media, and they come up against a really tough question. And, I don't want to talk about politics today, but you see that a lot with politicians and how they sort of deal with that. I would love for you to take that question and maybe share with our audience some really good strategies in tackling those questions, the real tough questions that maybe A, you don't want to answer, or B, you're afraid you're going to answer it incorrectly. But I'll turn it over to you, Mark.
Let me give you a little secret for your audience. You may be the one that they're asking questions of, but you do not need to answer the question that they're asking. You can't say no comment. You can't walk away from the interview, but you can pivot or bridge to a message that you want to convey instead. Let me break this down. So it's really key when I've got a client going in front of an interview that we talk beforehand about what are the key messages? What are the one or two key messages we want to hit here? And how are we going to put those messages into almost every answer? So if a journalist asks you a very uncomfortable question, then it is an art to pivot away from the journalist question and to your message or the answer you want to deliver. You mentioned politicians. There are some that absolutely bungle this all the time. And
Mhm.
they're very, very suave at it. Like, and so my message is, and I cover this in every media training that I do, we go over prompts, we go over suggested uncomfortable questions and how you would pivot to your message and deal with that. So if you were to ask me, why did I steal $1 million?
Right.
I'm not going to repeat that allegation. I'm not going to say I did not steal $1 million, right? Because you're incorporating that concept that you don't want to be associated with into your answer. And then they can cut and use that. Instead, what you want to say is, we have the highest ethical and moral standards here at this company. We have done that for 20 years. We will continue to do that for 20 years, and we will not tolerate anything less. You see what I did there? So I am saying that we stand for these values that anybody in the audience, anybody reading or listening to that journalism, they're going to say, oh yeah, I stand for ethics too. If you're associating with what most people would identify as a great answer, but you're not reincorporating out of your mouth the word in the uncomfortable question that you don't want to answer. So you're right. It is an art, very uncomfortable, but with practice and appropriate media training and coaching, you can deal with it like a pro.
Yeah. And what if somebody showed up on one of our listeners' office steps and had some questions about something that was going on? How should they deal with that?
So this is known as the ambush interview, or colloquially speaking, the unscheduled interview. A nicer frame on that. But typically, and I leave a carve out for public officials, so we can deal with that separately. In general, you do not want to engage with an unscheduled interview. Why? One, you're not comfortable. Two, you're not prepared. Three, you
Right.
probably haven't practiced or rehearsed with somebody your messages. And have you ever seen somebody get ambushed by Mike Wallace or Leslie Stahl or Steve Croft or Robin Roberts or anybody, and it looks great? I mean, have you ever seen anybody ambush and it looks great? Probably
Right.
not.
Right.
Right.
True.
You
Yeah.
know, now you can certainly give that journalist the contact information of your PR or your comms team, et cetera. I'm not saying don't engage at all, but giving substantive answers or anything, it's just not going to, generally speaking, benefit you. Now, I will say from the journalist point of view, it's not always about an ambush. It's about
Right.
getting the answers for their audience. And sometimes if you're ignoring them, that is the only avenue left. And journalistically, ethically, they have a responsibility to come and find your point of view. They have to try. And so it's always about a gotcha moment. It's not that. It's that sometimes if you're avoiding them and your comms team has not given adequate information, it's incumbent upon the journalist to try to reach you. Now, I did a carve out for politicians. In general, for politicians, and I'm talking about elected officials here,
Right.
they should be prepared at any time, because when they're in public, they should just assume they're always being recorded. and so a little bit of a carve out for politicians, but we're talking about executives mainly here.
Yeah. Yeah. And, let's say it's, an interview that's scheduled. If you were to give some advice to a business owner or a professional who was dealing with a journalist, what would be some of your recommendations?
Sure. So you always want to go in prepared. So
Mhm.
I would want to know if I was an executive, I would want to know who's the journalist, what's the outlet, what are the general areas that they want to talk about. Never ask a journalist, what are the questions you're going to ask me? That's really a red line for a journalist. That's a no. It's unethical to provide those questions in advance. No matter what you see on social media or any snark in the replies, journalists in the US do not give the exact questions to the people that are being interviewed. It just doesn't happen. Now, it often happens where a good comms person, a good PR firm will say, well, what are the topics you want to cover? Can you give me some areas that you
Mhm.
want the executive to address? Absolutely. That's totally fair game. And if they're coming to interview you about, this new, let's just take the sunscreen example, you should be prepared for anything, on that topic. If they start asking you about world peace, you can certainly say, you know what, I'm not prepared to talk about that. Our interview today is about how you're going to prevent cancer using, sunscreen, et cetera. So one, it is to be prepared
Mhm.
and don't walk into an interview, no matter how versed you think you are in the topic, without some sort of preparation for sort of gaming out what questions you think they're going to ask, gaming out responses, gaming out your pivots, your messaging. And so I would always say, go in prepared. Don't let your ego get in the way here. It's not going to go well typically. The
Right.
second thing I would say is always at the end, ask the journalist if they had any questions that they were unclear about. So in other words, if you're explaining something about, an ingredient in sunscreen, that's the new thing that the FDA is just approving, it's in Europe now, it's coming to the US, you want to make sure that the journalist understands how that compound works. And
Right.
they're usually pretty good at saying, I don't understand or I don't know, but we're all human. And sometimes we don't want to look dumb. So
Mhm.
more benefit as the person being interviewed to make sure you're patient enough so that the journalist can understand what they're talking about. Don't get frustrated. Don't get irritated. Don't think the journalist is dumb. Remember, this is not their world, right? They could be covering a car crash yesterday, sunscreen today, and the White House tomorrow. And
Right.
so you need to make sure that you're clear enough. And that after the interview, immediately, is there anything else I can answer for you? Or is there anything else, that wasn't clear? And then encourage the journalist either with you directly as the person being interviewed or your comms team,
Mhm.
reach out with any fact checking questions you may have before air or before publishing. We'll be happy to explain them to you. That was my best practice when I was running the National Investigative Unit at Hearst. I always told the person I was interviewing, you'll hear from me before this story goes online or goes on the air, because one, I want to
Yep.
fact check you. Two, I want to give you the link and tell you when it's going to air.
So, what I like to talk, I think this would be helpful for the audience who may be on the news. What do you have for what should they wear? I mean, we don't want big polka dots or big flowers or crazy outfits. So can you give some recommendations for, maybe how to dress, how to appear, what looks good, what doesn't look good?
Okay, so no one is going to say that I am the arbiter of style. You will never see me on the cover of GQ. So just take that with a grain of salt. But we're just talking about TV here. First of all, look at what I'm wearing. It's almost forgettable, right? It's a solid light shaded blue. You don't
Mhm.
want to wear white because if you're not wearing a cover, sometimes white will blow out the lens of the camera. It's harder for the camera lens to adjust to pure white. So if you're a
Mhm.
woman, I wouldn't want to wear a full white dress or a
Right.
white blazer. If you're a man, try to avoid white shirts. Go with something like this. Very light blue, no patterns, no check marks, no plaid, no patterns. Even pinstripes, I'd probably stay away with because if they're too thin, you're going to get what we call dancing.
Okay.
Lines, the lines almost appear as if they're dancing. This really happens once you start converting that video into lower quality formats. So for social, et cetera. Dude, look at my blazer, what I'm wearing. It's just is a darker shade of blue. It's nothing fancy. It's not bright red. And so this is very pleasing to the camera. And more importantly, Linda, and I can't stress this enough, it's not about your personality when you're on camera conveying a message. It's about the message. So why would I wear a red polka dot, purple polka dot blazer and a bright green shirt and all this jewelry and earrings because that's distracting to my message. I'm losing the viewer because they're looking at everything that I'm wearing as opposed to looking right at me and listening to what I'm saying. So wear something that is not distracting, that's not attention grabbing. You can do the fancy floral prints some other time, but you just want something that's almost like this, very plain, very pleasing to the camera, and not distracting for your message.
Awesome. What do you think the biggest misunderstanding is that, executives might have about journalists today and sort of just the news media in general?
That's a tough one because I think there are several misunderstandings today. So I'll just try to pick one. In general, many executives don't really know exactly what journalists do. And the level of media literacy, not just with executives, but across the country, is really at an all-time low. And I'm not talking about whether you read the newspaper or not or consume media, but it is what is the role of a journalist? What is the role of the news media in America? What is the role of an independent news organization? As I said off the top, it's not to pitch your product. It is not to make you look good, which a lot of executives really have a hard time understanding. They want their comms team to get a headline changed or to get something different in a story. And the comms team says to you, well, is it factually inaccurate? The executive says, no, it's not inaccurate. I just don't like it. Well, that's irrelevant whether you like it or not, right? It's upon you to convey your message accurately. It's upon the journalist to report the facts accurately, but whether you like the phrasing or a word is really not the journalist's job. And so I think there is a misunderstanding about what journalists are doing, who they are, and how the news is gathered, which is why, Linda, in my media training, I start with Media 101. What are the broadcast TV markets in America? How does a broadcast newsroom work? How does a newspaper work? How does radio work? The basics. And I have to tell you, I do
Right.
full training. That part off the top generates the most questions of any portion of my media training. And because I think it is that the media literacy has gone low and
Mhm.
declined. And so what I would say for an executive is, please don't misunderstand the job of a journalist. The job of a journalist is to report the facts, include context, hold the powerful to account, and at all times serve their audience, not to serve you and not as an extension of your PR firm. And so I think that's really difficult sometimes for executives and thought leaders to grasp.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Mark. So you've been to 85 countries from what I understand, so you know where all the great deals are. Would you like to share with our audience a
Sure.
couple of
I
websites
actually,
they
I
wanna go
actually,
to? Huh?
so it's now 86. I was just at Monaco for
Oh, yeah.
Memorial Day weekend. And I used to run a startup that focused on cheap travel deals. And so what I would say is this: if you're paying more than $500 round trip for economy, you're probably paying too much. I went to Australia for under $300, and that's on a lie flat bed. And I went to Japan for 400 and all these places. And what people get wrong is you decide I'm going to London and you ask your boss for the time off and you get the time off. And then your wife gets the time off. And then you find plans for the dog and you tell the school you're taking the kids out and you make all these plans. And then you start looking for flights
Mhm.
and then you start looking for hotels. Well, you're already toast because at
Right.
that point you're locked into days, certain specific days. Where you get the best deal, Linda, is when you're flexible. So I want you to turn this on its head. Stop with everything else and I want you to look for the deal. Set yourself a budget. Is it 500? Is it 1,000 per ticket? What is it? And then look for those deals and those destinations. Be flexible with the dates, the destination, et cetera. And then when you find the deal, book it and plan everything else. And the great thing is in the US since 2011, there's a US Department of Transportation rule that says airlines that market to US consumers must give you 24 hours to cancel for a full refund or 24 hours to hold the reservation. Practically speaking, almost all airlines now let you cancel within 24 hours for your money back. Delta, I'm not paid by Delta. Delta actually gives you until midnight of the following day. So
That's
that's almost 48 hours if you booked right after midnight. And so why wouldn't you book the deal when you see it? Because it could be gone in a flash. Then ask your spouse, ask your work. You've got, a day or two to figure it out. So most people get locked into the days and the destination before even looking for travel. I say do the opposite.
that's
Find
great.
your ticket and then
Yeah.
book.
What fantastic advice. That's awesome. Thank you for that. I'll take that advice. And then lastly, so you won the Showcase Showdown on The Price is Right, huh?
I did, God rest Bob Barker's soul and Rod Roddy. They were both the host of the announcer when I was there. This was when I was in college at the University of Southern California. So it was a very, very long time ago. And it's a long story, but the bottom line is I went with a group of freshmen from USC. And they interview you, Linda. Can you believe this? You think it's random when you watch on TV, but it's not random. They interview the audience in groups of 10 before you ever get inside. And so I was in a group of 10 fellow USC students, and the producer says, okay, well, tell us what your name and what your major is. And I'm number 9 of 10. And I'm looking down the row, and everyone's saying their name and their major. And I'm thinking to myself, how in the world am I ever going to get on The Price is Right if all I say is I'm Mark and I'm a broadcast journalism major? It's not going to happen. So they get to me, and of course I say Mark, broadcast, and then I start jumping up and down, and I'm screaming, and I'm talking about how great the marching band is because I play alto saxophone. We're going to beat Notre Dame. We're going to beat UCLA. I'm going on and on. We get out of the interview, and all my friends say, "You blew it. You were a fool. You made a fool out of yourself. You're never going to make it on the showcase on the show." Long story short, I made it on the show, and I won the gift to get on stage. I won all the gifts on stage. I won the showcase showdown, and then here I am, a freshman in college, and they take you backstage. And
Mhm.
contrary to public belief, you can't simply take the cash value. It doesn't work that way. They give you a contract, and you have to either take all the prizes and the tax liability
Oh, wow.
or forfeit.
Oh, you're
And so
kidding.
you have to think right then and there which ones you want to take. And so I ended up selling everything to keep the car. I won a 1996 Camaro RS T-top. So here's
Okay.
this college freshman, and now I'm
That's
rocking a
cool.
different car. It was a ton of fun, but it was a crash course in tax liability.
That's great. That's awesome. So, Mark, I'd love for you to share with the audience on where they could take your training, the website, how to get in touch with you, and so on and so forth before we close today.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. So I have two things for the audience. One, we started this talking about public speaking. I actually have a tip sheet, 6 tips to be a better public speaker. And all you have to do is text the word media, which of course is very appropriate, to 33777. So 33777, text the word media. We'll send you that free guide to public speaking. And along with that, we are going to send you an announcement of our in-person media training event and experience that is happening in September of 2024 in Washington, D.C. Now, your podcast is super popular. So for anybody listening to this right now, and it's after September 2024, don't worry. We have another one coming up after that. So just keep going to our website. This is an immersive experience, Linda. So it's going to be 2 days in DC. You're going to do a mock on-camera interview with me on set at an anchor desk, a block from the White House. You're going to do a mock podcast interview. You're going to go on stage and deliver lines on stage to an audience. You're going to be doing headshots. You'll get all of those video clips, audio clips, and still photography for your demo reels, for your website, for your PR initiative. We're going to have workshops on personal branding and marketing. We've got the head of a speakers bureau coming. How do you work with a speakers bureau? How do you get paid in book to speak? We've got a lesson on body language, voice, intonation, how to talk to the camera. It's this immersive experience. We'd love for your listeners and audience to join us. Again, just text the word media to 33777. We'll send you all the details. It's going to be amazing. And I hope everybody can join us.
Awesome. And would you share your website as well?
MediaAdvisoryExperts.com. MediaAdvisoryExperts.com. We advise you on the media.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark. And I just want to take a moment and thank our audience today for listening in to the B2B Brand 180 podcast. We hope you found insights from Mark today helpful. I sure did. And until next time, enjoy your marketing.